doesn't. Listen.
Everything in here except for these weeds here is all ZBrush. ZBrush animated and rendered in Maya using V-Ray. So I'm working on this. It's just kind of a side project just for fun. The compression's kind of killing the colors, but you know. Oh, actually, it looks better up there. Oh, nice. So having a little bit of fun with that. And my brother's helping me write some music. But it's kind of fun. I mean, all the textures on here, this is all poly painted. So poly painted in ZBrush, and then, you know, a little bit of tweaking in Photoshop, a little bit of ZBrush, and make it up. Well, you start, basically what I did is I just started with a sphere, and then you just move the slider up here, and then above 3. So it's very easy. It's like psychic. There you go. So what am I doing here? Actually, what I'm doing, this is a really cool feature of ZBrush 4 R4, which just came out, what, 2 weeks ago? 2 or 3 weeks ago? It is an undo history, and it's really cool because what happens is while you're working, ZBrush records all of your undos and keeps it with the file, and it's actually saved with the project. So when you save the ZBrush project, if this button is on, it will save all of your undos, which is cool because what you can do is you can go back and scrub through time all the way back to when your awesome sculpt was just a wee little poly sphere. So what I'm doing here is this is all a single subtool in this version right here, and I'm actually using Dynamesh and Insert Sphere, and so you can see I'm starting to work with Dynamesh. Now, I'm making an assumption that you guys are somewhat familiar with ZBrush, and if I start throwing out terminology that doesn't make any sense or something you're not familiar with, please feel free to ask me. But Dynamesh is this great technology that allows you to work with polygons as if it was just really literally like clay. In other words, as you work in ZBrush, you can see that I have started with a basic regular sphere here, and as I started to draw in the strokes, I immediately decided, you know, once I got to this level, I decided this is something I wanted to work with and continue with this kind of design. If you have the Dynamesh enabled, then every time you control drag on the screen, basically it remeshes the surface, which removes a lot of the stretching and also fuses the parts together. So as I start to add the thorax here, you can see I'm getting this stretched topology, this polysphere. You can also see this gray part on the head is indicating that it's been masked. So once I have it close to the shape that I like, I can just control, I've actually inserted the abdomen there. So I'm just sort of sketching this out, but at a certain point you can see where it goes from kind of stretched out polygons to nice and smooth. I like Dynamesh a lot. There's a lot of ZBrush users that have kind of mixed feelings about it. It depends on kind of your personality and how you like to work. Well, the reason I like Dynamesh so much is it really makes the ZBrush like a sketching tool. So I actually sketch almost entirely in ZBrush. That's where I come up with my ideas, and that's the way that I like to work. And I tend to think of the Dynamesh phase as being kind of like if you were drawing a picture and you're drawing little sketchy lines on a pad of paper. That's the kind of thing, you're just getting out the idea here. So I'm just basically making the idea. So I've got basically the proportions for the head and the thorax and the abdomen. And a lot of times what I'll do, of course, is I'll rotate to a side view and switch over to a different material, such as flat color, set this over black, and work in sort of a silhouette form, which is I'm sure you guys are familiar with this technique. It's very similar to working with a big fat magic marker. You can work on the forms and not get lost in the details. So you can sort of see I'm working through here and trying to figure out what is the basic the proportions, what's thinking about in terms of negative space versus positive space. I did a little trick here. There's a cool brush that I like to use, a new one called the Spiral Brush, and it's really neat because it allows you to sort of, I use it to sort of twist the forms around just a little bit, give it a tweak to sort of play with some ideas. So you can see I'm just scouring through the history here. It's starting to chug a little bit because it's getting a little bit flex, and I'm adding a lot of polys here, but it still works pretty well. As you can see now, I've decided to add the mandibles, and I'm just kind of working them out. But one of the nice things about the undo history, and this is really, I mean, it's amazing how useful this is, not just for sort of showing where you were in terms of your sculpting, but if you're sculpting, you're getting up to a certain point, you have this ability now to just sort of compare and contrast instantly. You know, this is the change that I made. Do I like it? I'm not sure. Well, I can just scrub back. Oh yeah, I think it's definitely an improvement, so I can sort of go forward. If it's not an improvement, if it's something that I don't like, then I can just scrub back to a certain point in time and start sculpting, and it'll just branch off into a new version. So when you do that, it will come up with a warning, and it basically eliminate the undo history from that point on. But it's really neat because the fact that this is saved with the project, that means that as I'm working, you know, I can even repurpose this model for other bugs. If I've got something that I like, or I want to do variations, I can go back to a certain point in time, maybe like right here. And this is where I've decided it's time to do some retopology. And the reason, you know, I like to do retopology at this phase because my goal with retopology, for the most part, is to create a surface now that has a grain that I can sculpt with. So I sort of think of sculpting on the polygons like you would carve along the grain of a wood, right? So I want to create something that's not only animation friendly, not only something that's lighter in terms of polygon count, but also something that now I've got my major forms worked out, now I can sculpt along these forms. So so that's where I'm going to bring in with QRemesher. So the technique that I'm actually going to use here, I don't know if I have this entirely in the history, but what I want to do is so there's a couple ways to do retopology now in ZBrush, which is really nice because I've been doing Z-sphere retopology for years, and it works all right, but for some reason my students seem completely allergic to it. Now they've introduced new ways to do topology in ZBrush for R4. So my students can now slack off more than ever, because it's easier. So the two ways to do it is, one is called QRemesher, and the other is the retopology brush. So the way QRemesher works is if I go into the geometry palette, and I'm going to expand the QRemesher subpalette here, and it's sort of this automated process. And the way this works is you take the QRemesher guide brush, which is this one right here, and you basically draw on the surface a few curves, right? So the first thing that I did is I actually re-Dynamesh the surface at a lower topology. The reason I want to do that is I want to get my polygon count really low. So you're probably saying to yourself, hey man, but you lost all that detail when you started to sculpt. So what I actually did was I first made a duplicate, which I probably deleted like a fool, of the head that has the original detail in it. And I kept that around because I'm going to actually use projection. So now I have a new duplicate to my head that I'm going to QRemesh, and then I'm going to use the original head and projection to project the detail from the original background of the new. I hope that makes some kind of sense. If it doesn't, ask Paul about it. He gives my book. It's in my book though. At least everything on projection. So projection is another one of those things that's a real lifesaver. So I've started to draw out the curves here. And the curves, they only need to be very general. You don't need to go crazy on these things. Even this is probably more than I need. But I know I want to have some kind of edge loop around the eye sockets and the antenna, and something to go around the overall form. So I've drawn these out, and once I've gotten them up to a certain point, that's probably enough. And I don't know if you can see this, but it is symmetrical. So there's ones on the other side. I just basically hit the QRemesher button right down here, and it calculates the new topology for me based on the curves, right? And there's the new topology. So now you can see I have an edge flow that's a little bit more friendly towards the sculpting that I want to do. And then after that,
here you see we've got the character with our subdivision level. This doesn't have the subdivision levels. This one has the subdivision levels. Here we go. There's a fair bit of detail on there. There's not a lot. You can see where it's maintained some of the original form in the superhero sculpture. It would all need to be revisited, but it's there as a guide. It's at least you don't have to start completely from scratch. So what I would do is I would go down to the lower subdivision level and click Free Subdivision Levels. If we go into polyframe mode, you can see there's some polygroups on here. I'm going to go ahead and clear this center polygroup. I'm going to go to Polygroups, Group Visible. So we've got the arms and the legs and the torso, all as separate polygroups. What I want to do is I want to carve out a negative space through the center of the figure. So I'm going to mask out, mask glass up, and mask out hole, right through the center of the figure here. You see that goes all the way through the back. And I'm going to invert the mask. I'm going to come down here to polygroups, and I'm going to create polygroups from masking. So that's going to create a new polygroup right there that's created entirely from the mask. Now I'm going to go to the primitives here. I'm going to select the cylinder 3D. I'm going to turn it into a polymesh, and I'm going to hide the end caps. So I end up with what is essentially a hollow tube. Turn double-sided there. Okay. Now, with that oriented like that on screen, you can't see it if you're looking straight down. If I turn on perspective, you get a better look at it. I'm going to go to the brush menu here, and I'm going to click Create Insert Brush, Insert Mesh. I'm just going to create a new one. So that's created a new brush now that just inserts cylinders. So now if I come back over to my figure, there she is. If I hold down the Alt key, remember in ZBrush, anytime you hold down the Alt key, you're subtracting. If I hold down Alt, click and drag, I draw that cylinder out. I'm going to go to my display properties and turn on double so I can see it really clearly. I'm going to go to the Move brush. A lot of times I navigate my brushes, by the way, with these hotkeys, B for brush, and then just press the first letter of whatever brush name. That would be M for Move. Now it's narrowed the list down, and you can see that the letter V is the Move brush, so I press V, and that gives me the Move brush. Make sure X symmetry is turned on, and then I'll just start shifting this cylinder so it's falling. I'm going to turn off frame mode so you can see a little bit better. So basically I'm just trying to create a tunnel going through the character. And so once I'm happy with that shape, I control-click drag, and that clears the mask. And then I control-click drag again, and that carves that hole in the center of the figure. And then if I unfreeze my subdivision levels, it will come back and then reapply all of my sculpted detail, maintaining that carved out section going through the center of the figure. So this one's running a little bit faster because I don't have quite that many subdivision levels hanging out. So you can use these insert brushes not only to add things, which we're going to do a lot of. I'm going to add teeth inside there using the insert brush. But you can also use it to take away. You can carve out sections or punch holes directly through something. We've done a lot of, I get a roll and I have to make sure I don't say anything that I'm not supposed to say. We've done lots of sci-fi stuff. Where, it's like, you're sitting there trying to come up with something new. It's just like, you need to be able to cut shapes out. You need to be able to knock things out. And then, for the guys that are working in Photoshop all the time, there's a lot of them that are amazingly talented Photoshop painters. It's no problem to knock out negative spaces. But if you're trying to sketch something in ZBrush, you really need to have that ability. You need to absolutely, now more than ever, need the tool to be out of your way. So you're really just creating directly on the screen. And everything you need to add, subtract, take two entirely different models and glue them together is right there. So there we go. There's all of our detail again with our hole carved through. There's all of our subdivision levels. And I would then go in with the smoothing brush and then just smooth off these edges. I would step down and then smooth off the problem areas there. And then just using the move brush, I would start to adjust the shapes. And then at this stage, you can go in and make other big changes. Like at this point in the process, I said to my girlfriend, I was like, Mare, look at this. This is great. And she said, no, it's way too stumpy. It needs to be longer. And so, oh yeah, you're right. So I would go in with the transpose tools and start stretching things out and making the character even longer and more, alien, more graceful looking. So thanks for that. So then I mask out the limbs. Do the same thing. I'll just use my transpose line just to start stretching those limbs out. I really like things with long, spindly arms, and I think it's because they, like I had an art teacher years and years when I was in like elementary school, who said that, because everything he drew kind of looked like him, and he's like, you always draw what you look like, you always draw yourself, so I was like, okay, well, I'm really short, and not exactly long, so I made a conscious effort, I think, to just make things that didn't look like me, which is like, defeats the purpose now, so everything I do is like this long, spindly boogeyman thing. So, there we go. So, these are all done with custom insert brushes in curve mode. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and open up, and I'll put all these brushes up online for you guys as well. I'll talk to Paul and figure out a way to put these up on the Pixologic site if you're interested in them. They're very easy to make for yourself. So go to the File menu, go to Open, and we'll open up our custom brushes. And this has just got the geometry for all the brushes as separate pieces. And the way you make the custom brush is the exact same way that I made the insert brush for the cylinder where I knocked out that hole. Turn off the frame right there. So here you can see I've got these X stitches, and this is huge. I made so many cross stitches like this in the last like 10 collectibles I made. It was insane. It was really difficult. You have to go into Maya and draw these little curves and longitude along the curve, and it was a nightmare. And now there's this brush, now that I've done my last collectible. It's like, ah! But at least I've got it now. So I've got this brush that I made for these cross stitches, and that's really, really fun to do. And all I did was, went into ZBrush, created 2 tubes and 4 rings, and made the shape that you see here. Anything that you can make out of any ZBrush primitive or any sort of model you can make in Maya and then import, basically all you need is a Z tool. I come up here to the brush menu and click Create Insert Mesh, and I'll click New. And what that does is it's created a new brush for the cross stitch here. Now I'm going to go to my stroke menu, and I'm going to open up curve, and I'm going to turn on curve mode. Now what that does is when I draw my curve, those stitches now follow along that curve, but they're way too tight together. So what I'll do is I'll take my curve step and set that up to like, let's say 1.5. That spreads them out a little bit. I'm going to turn on my draw size. There we go. Something about like that. So now if I pop back over to my character, go down to her skirt here. She's got this skirt thing on. Let's say I want to run some stitching down the side of the skirt. I just need to make sure that there's... See, I can only have one subdivision level, so what I'll do is, then if I want to put stitching onto something that's got multiple subdivision levels, is I'll step down my subdi levels, I'll duplicate that Z tool, and I'll just use this as a proxy. I'll delete my subdis, and then I'll draw my curve along there. So that creates my cross stitching. You see it's all polygrouped separately. And if I come in, zoom in here, I can adjust that curve so those stitches lay tight against the surface. And in my curve menu, there's a snap button here. Make sure that's turned on and your curve will actually snap to the surface. So if I'm happy with where those stitches fall, I'll Control-Shift-Click.
Using it on a shadow box. Okay, so now I have my shadow box, which you guys are all probably used to by now, right? I like to work out of perspective mode, sometimes work in a shadow box. By default, this is going to have a texture on it, okay? But if I turn my grid on, all right, you can see that it's kind of matching up my shadow box, okay? So when I go to the draw palette, I'm gonna dot this guy right here. And I'm gonna have it, it's gonna dot. Here we go. Okay, so just like Scott said, we have all these new features for the grid. So obviously I had a front view of my horse and a left-right view of my horse. So I can go, okay, there's my side view of the horse, okay? Then I'm gonna go to front back. I'm gonna click that. Now what I also wanna do, okay, is I can do shadow box. So obviously you guys know I can just start doing this, right? And I start getting geometry, right? So that's really cool to be able to do that. I always work in transparency mode with Ghost on, that way I can look through everything, right? And it also allows me to make those pesky little holes that I want to make, okay? But what I want to do is, okay, I'm so proud of my drawing here, I don't want to look at it anymore. So I'm actually going to adjust these images. So right below the image here, you have this adjust button. So I'm going to say adjust, and you get is the image capability where I'm adjust. So I actually only want to look at this part of my horse, okay? And this is all I'm going to look at, and then I'm going to say okay, and then boom, there you go. Now that's the only part of the image I'm looking at. And now I only want to look at this part of the horse, so I'm going to go to adjust and say, okay, now let's just look at this part of the horse. okay? I don't know who did these drawings, but they're awesome. And then there you go. So now all I have to do worry about is lining up. Now, which is very cool is right now I'm using shadow box, okay? Let's, for giggles, let's add a polysphere in here. So I'm going to select polysphere, all right? And now I have a polysphere in there. And the reason why I'm doing that is, okay, so here's my shadow box tool, and I'm just going to append it, just so you guys can see it, all right? Do you see these lines that are kicking across now? There's a red one and a blue one. I actually use those to line up. So, for example, if I am going to use something, say, like the eye, I can now say there's the eye, and then try to line it up in here. Now, just like what Scott did, I'm going to turn off shadow box, so we're only looking at the grid, right? I want to play with my meshes enhancement, okay? So we have enhancement features that you can do. So besides all this stuff we can do with our image, we can do stuff under the modifiers. Oh boy, there's more stuff for you guys to be able to use on the floor grid, okay? So you can change your grid colors, you can change your fill. This little thing, if this is getting annoying to you, having this coming across, I can actually turn off, and now I don't have it anymore, okay? I can turn it back up. All right, but this little piece, this little line that's coming across is what this P line is. So I can even turn them off too, or only turn one on, okay? So I found myself using this quite often. And then of course, like Scott did, you can snap to mesh and snap it to the spheres that you want to, okay? And then there's different modes. Okay, so right now I'm in mode 1. If you go all the way up to mode 3, that's when this sphere becomes transparent through. Okay, so there's actually 3 modes. So the reason why I like to have this mode on is I'll start to use this enhancement and literally look at just the line of my mesh. But then now if you look, I can pretty much see exactly that those eyes are lining up now. Come down to the nostrils, I can see that's completely lining up right now. Go to the top of the ears, right? So in essence, I'm using that P line to help me. So same approach as Scott, but now you're just now saying, well, now let's just use shadow box to do it. So obviously I turn on symmetry mode, okay, and I just start masking out my horse and start building my horse. Now if you can't see this really what's going on, it's because your image is probably too high, and you can start adjusting your image a little bit, and you can see through it too more. So you have not only the capability of adjusting tech, the mesh, you can adjust all your images. Okay? So this is a great workflow that I'm sure some of you guys probably want to start experimenting with. So not only can you use it the way Scott used it, but you can use it within Shadowbox. And what's the cool part about this, and what I'm so really proud of here, okay, is when I come out of Shadowbox, thanks for laughing for those that did, okay? Obviously we know Shadowbox is in here, so just like Scott said, if I hold down the shift key and click, everything expands, hold down the shift key and everything contracts. So I just want to look at just shadow box, come out of shadow box, I still have my images. So now that image is still lined up for me to be able to sculpt on this just beautiful horse. Just beautiful. I call him Lego Man. Now it looks like, actually more like a continent. There you go. I'm an artist, maybe. Okay, so this was the workflow that I did to get to this horse, believe it or not, right? Yeah, right, hard to believe. So this is the workflow, but what's really cool and what I want to really hone on before I get into the next curve thing is if I'm looking at just this mesh, I'll turn on solo mode, how I did this part in here, okay, if you're looking in here, playing that ridge, or even getting this line in here, was doing something like, let's use him because he's just great. Here we go. So if I start using the Topology brush, the one thing I really want to show you guys about the Topology brush, which was really cool for me, is because my hand is so steady, and I can keep such a great steady hand, right? And I wanted, oh yeah, that's real steady. I wanted to get this to be nice and smooth. So like Eric had brought it up, where you hit the 6 key, okay, and he starts creating it nice and smooth. Well, what you're actually doing with the 6 keys and in curve mode, I'm going to open up all these so you guys can see. You see the smooth button? When I hover over it, the number 6 is my shortcut. But what's controlling that is this curve smoothness. So the higher I put that, the stronger that smooth edge is going to happen. Right? So then now I can just come in here and start creating my pieces and start going along the way. Okay? So it's up to you. So be careful because for what's happening to me right now is I'm pulling the curve, because if you keep hitting 6 and you just do, this was great, right? You're going to start pulling it away from the mesh. So let's see if I can get it at an angle that you guys can see that. There. Right here, see it's starting to pull the curves away from the mesh, because we're just trying to smooth the curve out for you. So we're not anymore trying to do this, where it's just looking at the mesh and following the mesh, right? When I hit that 6 key, see it starts pulling it away? So even though it's cool, be careful. Don't do this. With this face too. And then when my fiance's around, she hears me doing this, oh, and I'm singing and doing, she's like, what's going on over there? Right? So I wanted to show you guys that because that's how I got that one piece in here. That's how I did this in here. Okay? And so how I did this piece, okay, was really quickly, because there's one particular thing that I want to show off, is the edge looping. Okay, so there's one thing I want to show off for the edge loop. So let's grab my polysphere. All right? And I got this, and let's just drop down, and I'm going to make the Death Star right in front of you right now. That's right. I'm going to do it right now in front of you. Okay, so I'm going to go to poly grouping, and we've added a couple new things for poly grouping. So one thing now that I like for the poly grouping, which was in R3, okay, but I find myself using a lot, is I'm doing a mask, and then I automatically make a poly group based on the mask. So what I'm doing is using the shortcut, Control W, okay, which is right here, Group Mask, Clear Mask. So that allows me to create poly groups really quick. But what we've added to this feature is now this polish slider. So if I did this, see how polished it down now?